and enlightenment. In Jesus' precious name we pray. Amen.
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 Amen. Thank you for that. So, for those who don't know us, I'm Colleen, this is Sherilyn,
Hi.
and today
Hi.
we have our wonderful special guest, Maria Thomas, all the way from the UK. Hey, hey!
Hi, good evening. Yes,
So,
from the very wet UK.
wet UK, wet
Yeah,
UK.
yeah.
So, but it's a bit hot here, like really hot.
Oh, wow.
But, you know, we give God thanks either way. So, just want to introduce you really first, Maria, before we kind of go in. 'Cause I think it's good for people to know who you are. So Maria Thomas is passionate about helping to engage and educate communities on why they need to act to get their houses in order, emphasizing the importance of leaving a meaningful and lasting legacy. Many people have it on their mind, and they do. They say, oh, I must do, and then they get around to it and mean to get around to it. And unfortunately, many are caught out before they do. Maria's clients describe her as leaving them with total peace of mind, having developed estate plans that align with their goals and values. They always go on to recommend her excellent service to friends and family. So Maria, you are the CEO, director of Thomas Top Cover. Is that correct? Is that your official
That's absolutely right. Yes,
Yeah.
that's my business name. Yeah.
Correct. And you're a financial consultant, but specializing in wills. Is that correct?
So I am, yes, both a protection advisor, so specializing in the suite of insurances from life insurance to business insurance to landlord insurance. But I also am an estate planning advisor as well. So as well as helping people to become protected by having the right insurance in place, insurance in itself becomes an asset. They need to then have their wills in place to ensure that everything within their estate is efficient. So I do the two services in one, really.
Known Maria for many, many years, and
Yeah.
I can attest to her professionalism, her diligence to our community, particularly the older generation, you know, making sure that our older generation are looked after, and just her passion for helping people, really. Sometimes she probably even undersells herself in terms of making sure that persons are, you know, secure. So I know this is very close to her heart, and, you know, anybody who does take up her service will have I'd say good experience in terms of doing something that is so kind of emotional. You know, doing wills and stuff can be very emotional.
Definitely.
Estate planning can be emotional. And so, you know, Maria will be one of the best people I could recommend.
Thanks
I
for
don't
that,
just say that
Colleen.
because of what, you know, who she is and what she does. So yeah, definitely. So just put it out there publicly for
No,
you.
thank you.
You know what they say, give people their flowers when they're alive, not, you know, when they're passed. So yeah. So that's Maria. So as I said, Maria, what we want to do is obviously look at kind of from a Christian perspective in terms of finance and money. And I'm sure, you know, we'd be able to relate it to, you know, the real world, into reality.
Yeah, the world.
So I know Sherilyn wants to start off with that.
Yeah, it's in terms of finance and money. I mean, we have so many persons like in a toss-up, because they feel that they're spiritually minded, that you know, they should leave everything in the hands of God. He will provide, He will protect, He will make a way, and they're not using the skills that He gave. He said He will give our hands, He will help us prosper through our hands. And yet we are not thinking, what are we going to do to prosper, or what we are going to do to manage what He gives us? And I remember raising that when we had band rehearsal yesterday, and said as one of the main concerns that people don't know what to do with their money. And we're talking about it in the Christian circles. And the last point on that is because they are so concerned about this prosperity message, they feel that they have to completely back away, you know, whereas I know our idea is always to keep things balanced, right? But how do you help a person or a young person coming up change that mindset to welcome looking at money and how we manage it? That's something
To respond to that, I would probably say it's the same as having faith without works, right? It's the same as somebody realizing that they have an ailment or they have an illness and putting their faith in God, but not understanding that God has placed a surgeon or a doctor with the right skills that they need to help them with that ailment or with their medication, to advise them appropriately. And I do consult many Christians, many people of faith who are torn about what to do with their finances. They want to bless others when they go, and they're torn. It could be something as simple as whether or not they want to be buried or cremated, because the dead in Christ shall rise. So
Yes.
they are then, well, how can I be cremated? Because if I'm cremated, I can't rise. And, you know, I often just advise people to pray on those decisions and to go with the message that God gives them. But ultimately, I present myself as a professional who, you know, it's my service through my knowledge and experience and my diligence that God has given me to support and advise that individual. But I can understand that people are torn, and maybe within your ministry and your church, as soon as you start to talk about money, it then becomes a question of, are you prosperity preaching? Because there are so many, there's been so much negativity when it comes to that. I think we revert back to scriptures, you know, because God talks about getting your house in order.
Right.
And by getting your house in order can mean both in life as well as death. And often, you know, people say to me, once they've come full circle, that, you know, they feel that they've now got their house in order, which is exactly what it states in scripture. So that's probably how I'd answer that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Because another point too, that's going back before we reach to the death part. Another thing is, even in church life, where the big debate and should the church pay a person for working, or let's say if I'm a keyboardist, should I be paid for it? Am I sinning? Am I just giving away my trading what God gave me as a gift and become more money focused? How would your take be on that?
Again, I think the person has to really take the time to look within. If an individual was giving their time to the church to the detriment of them having a profession, or taking time off from their paid profession in order to give their time to the church because that's where they felt God led them, I think that then it wouldn't be a question of whether or not they're sinning by taking some sort of financial reward, because ultimately, you know, they have to be paid. That's the way of the world. And I suppose there needs to be balance with looking at both.
Well said, balance.
Balance. Always the word, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So, because one of the things, like scripture says, is that, you know, we're stewards of the works. We're stewards, and one of the things is we're supposed to be good stewards of our finances.
Yeah.
Because everything that's given to us is given to us through God. And so we just execute it in earth. So everything that we're given is temporal, but it's supposed to be for the glory of God. And I think that comes back from your point about, you know, you've been given this gift of being a keyboardist. Should you then be paid for that?
Yeah.
And that kind of challenge or dilemma for a lot of Christians. But I think even though God gives us great gifts, it's always about that we say about the mindset, about making sure that you're always giving the glory back to God. And I think whether because there is this myth within the church that you're supposed to be not poor, but you shouldn't have great wealth. And if you've got great wealth, then, you know, kind of what's going on? What are you doing? And then if you don't have great wealth, oh, you must be doing something wrong. That's why God's cursing you, why you can't have wealth. So you're, you know, you can't win or lose, as it were. So I think it's about, as I said, for me, one of my things is about, nowhere in the Bible does it say that you shouldn't be wealthy. There's hundreds of scriptures. In fact, I wrote down, I think there's something like 2,000 scriptures which talks about money and possessions and wealth and so on in a positive way. True. Right? But yet we still have this negative perception of having wealth. Do you find that you have maybe clients who have acquired a certain amount of wealth, are Christians, and have had challenges with dealing with that wealth?
If I'm honest, probably not really. No, they're more challenged on how to distribute the wealth.
Right.
You know, and I'll say I've had a few that have considered their church within, you know, as being one of their beneficiaries, as a way to sort of give back. You know, we're talking about clients that often do tithe as well. So, you know, that's one way of them dealing with the conflict of they have wealth, you know, because whether it's 10% of whether it's whatever wealth it is, isn't it? So, so no, not really.
Yeah.
No, they're not so torn in that respect. It's more about how to distribute.
Yeah.
that wealth.
Okay.
Because I was thinking, you know, I checked it out. Who are the wealthy people in the Bible? And when I looked at the names, yes, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, his brothers, Lot, Job, Boaz, Abigail, King David, Solomon, Hezekiah, Zacchaeus, Matthew, Joseph, and the name continues. Right? These were people who had wealth, right? But it did not stop them from being. Abraham was recognized as great in faith. We talk about Job, how he was given double blessing. We talk about, we hear about Hezekiah. And these were great men in the Bible recognized, and even Dorcas, she was wealthy as well. And that is why she lived a life where she was able to give, even at her point of death. The people cried out because she gave, and her life is restored. So in other words, I'm not sure why it is, what has happened to cause the mind to shift or to be so much afraid. Because from my understanding is the love of money. The love of money is the root of all evil. But if your objective is when you achieve any blessing that you want to bless someone else, I think you become a channel or a vessel, you know? So I'm not sure. I think, you know, sometimes the enemy sows a little seed to stop that cycle of blessing which God intends for us.
I think there's also a cultural aspect as well. Obviously, having been in the UK and now in the Caribbean, I find that there is a cultural kind of perception or ideology about wealth in terms, especially within the church as well. And I think that does stem from our history in terms of slavery and poverty and so on. And we do tend to have quite a poverty mindset where we think, oh, we've got to hold on to this because I'm not going to get any more. I don't know if I should share. I work hard for mine, so you need to work hard for yours, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that kind of gets entwined also within Christianity, because you can't get away from our culture. You can't get away from our history. We can't get away from our experiences, even though, you know, we have our experiences as Christians. So I think that is also about it. And like I was saying to Maria previously, that, and I think she found the same, obviously being in finance, that our community has very limited financial literacy with regards to whether it's finance, whether it's tax, whether it's interest rates, whether it's best loans, you know, just financial literacy across the board is a problem. And I think with that lack of financial literacy added to the teachings that we've had before in church about wealth and poverty and being humble, and you know Jesus rode on a donkey, so you know everybody else should be like on a donkey, and you know, having that mentality, those two colliding together causes, I think, additional challenges.
Definitely. It'd be really interesting, Colin, to hear about whether or not you feel there is a difference in the community in Barbados versus in the UK as to whether or not they are happy to discuss finance. I find that people, so I tend to go out, I do talks on Zoom, talks, you know, within ministries and the Black and African Caribbean community, and people will listen when I talk, when I offload the knowledge about things they need to understand, and people are not often open to come and have a conversation in front of others. And more recently, I've been booked to have what I will call finance parties.
Wow.
So people have contacted me to come to their home. They've invited their children, their friends. So, you know, very much like the Avon candle parties or what have you. We're talking about finance on a more intimate level, and that's great. And that's become a thing. You know, I've been booked for on a couple of occasions, and they're pending. So it might be become a little bit of a trend. So it's interesting.
Get in on that, Maria. Get in on that. Get in on that.
No,
Start booking
definitely.
finance parties.
Yeah, it's they've heard me speak.
Mm.
They've understood and they like what I've said, and they want their friends and family to hear that in a setting where they can have a Q&A with me in a more intimate setting. And that's great, because ultimately it is a passion of mine to help people to gain an understanding, more so than when they came, of financial literacy, because there's so much that our people don't seem to know. And I think it's because they worry about the jargon. They're intimidated by the language. And ultimately, people aren't sitting at home talking about things. It's often things are kept secret.
Yeah.
So where can they have those conversations if parents aren't talking to their children about finances? They're not talking about it in schools. Where can they go? And then it doesn't become the norm. So, I really want to change that narrative and have it so that we normalize having conversations about finances within life and death, and what plans are within families, and how to increase wealth and leave legacies, so that it's normal. Because I just think you're right. It goes back to history, Colleen, as to why it isn't normal within our communities to talk about that.
It's almost like it's vulgar to speak about money.
Well, yeah.
Don't talk about money. Don't talk about money. I mean, my parents were not overly old, but there was never discussions around finances and money and how things, they went to work, there was bills to pay, and money that grow on trees and all of that stuff, but you didn't have an idea of how money is made, how to use your money wisely. And those are some discussions that I try to have now with younger people and with my son and so on. So I think there is that shift that needs to be had, and that's where we recognize, that's why we're having a session. We recognize that that shift needs to happen in the church as well. Because there are people in the church who have wealth, they have money, and you want to make sure that they're either know what they're doing with it and utilizing it, as the Bible says. The parable of the three talents. We know all these things, so you're just going to sit on it and just not do anything with what God has given you, and hope that you're going to just multiply and be great. That's not, like you said, faith without action is dead. So how do we know all these scriptures, know the word, and then yet we're not applying it, or we are interpreting it maybe perhaps in a very different way, which is then leading to the detriment of our community and generations to come.
Exactly. Totally agree. Because I remember hearing more than one time, even in the church environment, I don't beg people for money, or I don't talk about money, this kind of thing. And it's like, they don't see it as part of the spiritual journey. No, even though the scripture talk about the way you handle your finance actually reflect your spiritual journey as well. I can't remember the scripture at the moment. I don't know if you spotted, but where a man's heart is, you will see it as he handles the finance. And when that application is not communicated clearly, you're going to have the fallback, you're going to have the confusion behind it. And I guess that's why the word savvy came up, because it's all about knowledge and the application. And that is what we need, how to apply what we know from the word of God in a practical way, so that we not only prosper spiritually, but beloved, I wish above all things that thou prosper in health and in every area of our life, even as our soul prospers, And I think that's why we miss out on some of the blessings in the church environment, because a lot of people come in for funds, donations, everything, and they'll just send it one way. But we're not talking about it because
you don't.
The old training.
The scripture is talking about Matthew 6:21. And then Jesus taught us that where our treasure is, there our heart will be also. So basically, the note I made here is that because people wonder what's money got to do with Christianity. And obviously, as I said, over 2,000 scriptures or verses about, finance and wealth and what have you. So it's clearly something that is important to God and to Jesus. So what I would say in terms of that scripture then is, with our money, it's not just simply indicate where our heart is, but where our heart will also go once you have that money. Because it says where our treasure is, there our heart will be also. So it's not just about the now, it's also about what's to come. So we need to, so as you acquire more wealth or even lose wealth, how does your heart as a Christian, how does that maneuver? How does that change, if at all?
Yeah.
And should it? You know, and obviously we know, as you said, the love of money. So our heart shouldn't change whether we're rich or whether we're poor. But we know that that doesn't necessarily correlate. You know, people do change because of money that they've acquired,
Yeah.
that they've acquired, as we well know. So, but you know, we can't serve two masters. You can't serve the money as well as God, but doesn't mean that you can't have money. It just means that you use it wisely,
Yeah.
good stewards of the finance that God has given you
Yeah.
to continue to give glory and praise to Him. And I think that's what, I think some people are sometimes frightened of money. I think
Well,
people are frightened
Definitely.
of money.
and I mean,
I don't know why.
That's what I'm
I
just-
think not, well, I think not everybody understands how money functions and how to manage money. So some people can be blessed with great wealth and it feel like a curse because they don't know how to manage and also how to act. And also with that, people will treat them differently, people will look at them differently. So it can almost feel that way.
Don't want to change.
You know, yeah.
To change that, because money does change people.
Yeah.
Whether it's, you know, good or bad, it will change you in some way. Even if you're, you know, if it's for good, you'll end up obviously being able to do more. And obviously we know the negatives of sometimes people
That's a good point.
have money.
I remember hearing several times Miles Monroe, money will only show who you are
Yeah, really, yeah.
in a greater way, magnified.
Correct.
So if you're stingy,
You're worse.
if you're a giving person, you'll give more,
Yeah.
more to give.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
So it reveals matters of the heart. And I remember, you know, when growing up as well, with mom and dad, you know, they both ministers, they'll put their head together and, you know, try to raise funds as they raise the family. You'll hear them say, make sure you get insurance, make sure you get a piece of land or something like that. But I've encountered persons who don't even believe that you should have insurance or let's say investment, because they're different. But let's say they don't believe they should do that. And I mean, how do we change that? And I believe that's what we want to do through this program here, you know, to cause us to think again on what it is we are doing, because sometimes you're just thinking about the now and the present, but what are we doing for our children?
I mean, it'd be interesting.
Yeah,
it'd be interesting to know what reasons people give. I mean, I get it over here as well. People often say, well, I don't need insurance. I don't need, everybody needs insurance. It's exactly what it is. It's an insurance. It's a just in case. There are insurances that we have to have by law, such as car insurance. But it's, you know, why would you insure your car, insure your mobile phone, but not insure your life? You know, to people who have a mindset of precaution, it makes absolute sense. You know, and that's what I tend to explain to people. Wealth can often start with a form of insurance. And for me, it's not always life insurance. We have something in the UK called income protection. So that if you are rendered to be long-term sick for more than your workplace will offer you sick pay, this will kick in and offer you an income for up to 2 years. So, and this is when, you know, often we talk about health is wealth. We say it, you know, but ultimately it's not until our health is challenged that we realize that absolutely that is a wealth and we can't control that. So when somebody loses an income, that's when they're challenged beyond measure, their lifestyle, you know, whether or not they can pay their bills, they can feed themselves or their children, they can keep a roof over their head. So for me, that's the first insurance, because that continues to give you an income.
Insurance.
And then there is an insurance such as critical illness. So similar to the income protection is if you're diagnosed with a critical illness, the likelihood is that becomes your priority. You know, you're not really thinking about being able to go to work. You're thinking about, are you going to be able to get over this illness? And for some, unfortunately, the illness may, you know, be quite debilitating. And they may have to then think about leaving work early, retiring early, and so on. But then if they haven't got an income, what happens then? So critical illness insurance will pay out if they're diagnosed with something that could be terminal, or, you know, depends on the severity of the illness.
Mhm.
And then the insurance, the priority that kicks in after that would be life insurance. Life insurance pays, once you've passed away. So it doesn't benefit you in life, it benefits your descendants or your beneficiary on death. And that's why for me, it's not necessarily the first priority, it's the third priority, because health is wealth, ultimately. So for
You'd
me, to
recommend
answer
that kind of
yeah, so in that
It's
kind
like-
of
that order.
priority order, when I
Yeah.
speak to clients and I advise them on protection, it's income, then it's critical, it's probably accident next, and then it's life.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
but to answer your question, what I find with people who were very negative about insurance is once I give them the knowledge and the understanding as to what each insurance policy would do for them in their own personal situation, that's when they become more in tune to actually having a policy and having insurance. 9 times out of 10, it's ignorance. They don't understand it.
Yeah.
And they think it's something that, it's not going to pay out, it's a waste of money. And it's when you give them the statistics and the reasons why it wouldn't pay out versus why it will, that they gain an understanding as to why it's a necessity. So again, it's that lack of knowledge.
I think you've mentioned about, we have car insurance because it's,
Yes, that was phenomenal. Yeah.
it's legal, it's
We do
legal
it.
to have it.
Yeah.
But it's also a case of, I think for some people, it's a case of, well, if I have car insurance and happens to my car, I will get the money. If something happens to my house, I will get the money. But if I have life insurance, I ain't getting the money.
Yeah.
Because it's on your death. It's with somebody else.
Yeah.
So again, going back to your heart.
Yeah.
Because for us, we're thinking, oh, I don't want to leave my family with that.
Yeah.
We don't want to leave them stranded. I don't want to have to, better about looking for money for the funeral, etc. etc. And that life insurance policy will cover that and give them something, hopefully, to kind of, because I'm no longer here, income's not coming in. But for somebody else who has a different heart, well, I ain't got the money. So what benefit is it to me?
Yeah.
So
and there are clients
there
who,
is that.
yeah, there are people who are like that. I'm not gonna use the word stingy, but if that's their mindset in life, of course it's gonna be their mindset in death. And and that's
I'm dead and gone.
fine.
So
Yeah.
what's the point?
Yeah.
What's the point? And that again, it's about education, because they may think, oh, what's the point? But they don't realize, because you're dead, how much funerals actually cost. Even the basic funeral is costly, right? So unless you've got a little savings put down, then you need to have something. You've got children or whatever, you should have something to not leave that burden behind. But it's not always the case. But as I said, Bible talks about the heart, where your heart is. It depends on where, what you do and how you steward your finances.
Yeah.
So yeah. And here we don't have, I know in England for some mortgages, for example, you have to have house insurance.
Yeah.
Here you don't.
Okay.
You've had so many people have fires and things and they don't have insurance. And then they don't, and then they're left with nothing. So they're left with the community to either get together or they have to, look to the government for assistance. So that's also something that they should, even if it's just building insurance, I think, they should have. So
I'm not sure if how that come into play, because I know lately, in terms of when you're getting a mortgage, even though you feel excited, you get through it, you'll get it. They insist that you get house insurance, and that is why I wonder.
They do, but how these people are lapsing? They're probably lapsing.
All lapsing.
Or they might not have a mortgage. They might have built their house direct, right? They might, because we can build houses here, so we can buy our land. So even if it's a wooden structure or a concrete structure, if you've built that bit by bit, you don't have a mortgage, so you're not to have a house insurance. It's only if you've got a mortgage, you have to, then you're tied in. There's lots of people here who have built their houses from scratch, or it's been a legacy inheritance.
Right.
So there's no mortgage attached, so they can just live.
Yeah.
They can live without it. So that go ahead, Muriel.
I was just saying it's about people's motivations, isn't it? It's and you're right about when I speak to clients, I do see their heart. I have clients who I'll consult them on insurance, and they want life insurance over critical, income or accident, because they don't want people to talk about them once they've died.
You see?
They
Yeah.
want they want to make sure that they're provided for their funeral so that they're not spoken about in a negative way, that they didn't
Yeah.
have provision.
No. Let me put a bit of
Okay.
context, because funerals in the UK are
Mhm.
a bit different from in the
Yeah.
Caribbean.
Mhm.
Because here I've noticed that we do the church ceremony. You have maybe a wake at the house,
Okay.
what we call 9-9, something to that, and then you'll have the funeral, and then that's it. There's no reception, there's no kind of,
Okay.
very rarely. There might be
Right.
one or two people gathered together at the family home or what have you, but we have, it's almost like a wedding, isn't it? You have
So
the
you
whole,
end at the burial ground.
we end at the burial ground.
Right,
Yeah, we
okay.
end at the burial ground. But in
Okay.
UK, for some, but in the UK, it's people. It can be very different. It can be very different. It can be very different.
It can be compared to a wedding reception,
Yeah.
very much so.
Can I have a wedding reception?
And
Yeah.
and of late there is a trend to have a 9-night, which is
Mhm.
also very, very similar to the funeral reception.
Mhm.
So people will have a 9-night that, has 300 guests,
Mhm.
food, yeah,
This
and
is
then
before the burial.
and that's prior to the burial. And then after the burial, you may have 300 to 500 guests
Mhm.
to cater for. And if not everybody has a decent plate of food,
Mhm.
within our community, people can talk. So some
course.
people are seeing that and being put under more undue stress to provide for when they've gone, because in life they want to protect their reputation once they've gone.
Yeah. Yeah. Heart again.
And but I think it's good that for me, when they're able to talk to me, they see somebody who understands them when they talk about their dead left, and when they want to talk about their 9-night. I understand the language and I can fully
Alright.
support, and there's no judgment here. It's
Mm.
up to that individual to plan and to leave what they want to leave. But I've definitely noticed that people are putting more pressure on themselves to leave in their
Mm.
death to protect their
Like-
reputation that they have in life, which
Wow.
to me, I can't relate to personally.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can't relate. I
Ah.
can't relate to that. I'd rather be concerned about my family not being burdened with a
Yeah.
financial burden,
Have
but
something to
not
come.
really concerned about, if you give me a 9-night or a
Yeah.
reception or what have you, but just don't, there's now one less income or whatever. So,
Yeah.
you're more concerned about that.
Mhm.
That is interesting, that again, about this heart situation is
Mhm.
tied up very much in our finances and how we manage. Like you said,
Mhm.
money will just exacerbate whatever you're
The
currently,
state.
the
Mhm.
state
Yeah.
of your mind.
Mhm.
So, and I think that is why the prosperity teaching within church
Mhm.
has been so effective, I
Mhm.
think, to some extent, because people are seeing wealth very differently, with social media and so on, and are understanding to some extent that, you don't have to be poor to be Christian, but taking it to another extreme now.
Yeah.
Take it down. And then when you have prosperity preachers who are rubber stamping excessive lifestyles, living that lifestyle, and saying, and then having the audacity to say it's because of God
Yeah.
that we have this immense wealth. And that may be true. That
Mm.
is very true. That is why, because you've got your church and you're preaching the word and what have you.
Mhm.
But then again, as I said, what are you doing? You're a steward.
Mhm.
So what are you doing with that finance? And I think that's where the message gets lost in the
Yeah.
prosperity teaching
Yeah,
for
and
me.
I remember, as you indicated a moment ago, in terms of there are some ministers who are, promoting that they have this lavish lifestyle and so forth. And I also need to remind people, because in everything there'll always be the genuine and of course the counterfeit.
Of course.
But there are some ministers who are businessmen. They are film producers, writers, authors, they do workshop, and all of these things gain income. And don't forget, the Bible said God gives us power to get wealth.
Yeah, of course.
But it's how you get the wealth. And as you were saying, what you do when you get it. Some people might use that to say, well, look how God bless me. I'm his child. Something wrong with you. if you don't have it, you know? So it's just about, again, the motive and how you do what you do. But just bring balance, because people feel like all persons who have wealth, they did something wrong, or they're thieving, or they whatever, you know? So just a thought there.
Yeah, no, definitely, because I think it's also about what we're contented with. Because remember, Paul talks about us being content with our necessities. So whatever you're given, you should be content with. So that if you're given more, it's a blessing. You know, if you lose, just like Job, you're still content with what you've got. And I think that's a problem of our society in general, secular or in the church, is that we are having less contentment in our lives generally, because there's a constant comparison or constant, you know, you're inundated with imageries of a perfect lifestyle or what have you.
Lavish.
Yeah, the lavishness. So the level of contentment is rising. Oh, I'll be contented when I get that new job. I'll be contented when I get 50,000 in the bank. And then you get 50,000, you get the new job.
Yeah.
You're still not contented, because your heart, you know, generally your mind is not content. You always want more. And again, put it into context, nothing wrong with being ambitious, nothing wrong with wanting more. But it's about, if you didn't get more, would you still be content where you are? And again, that's scriptural, that you need to be content with where you are, irrespective of what comes and goes.
I think the story of Job brings that out, because it's like Satan went, you know, and before Jesus, and it's like, he's only serving you because of what he has.
Yeah.
I bet you if you took these things from him. So, you know, Jesus said, oh, okay, go ahead. But one thing you can't touch though, his soul. He lost everything. Yes, he cursed the day he was born. He went through, as we do humanness. There are times when we look at self and you wonder and you make statements, but then when he came back to reason, as he came back to God, then you know what he said, I will wait until my change comes. And that's when he prayed for the same people who were belittling him and talking him down. When he prayed for his friends, notice I said friends, then the Lord blessed them doubled. You know, so it goes back to the heart. What is your intention?
Yeah.
And even before he lost all his wealth, he was recognized in his village, in his area, this given, this kind. You know, so if your motive is in the right place, regardless of what happens, if he increase you, if you lose it, you still love the Lord, you still want to serve the Lord, you still want to represent him, you still want to be an example of the believer. You know, so it's about the heart, and it's coming out clearer now, even as we talk about it, you know, the heart. And that is why the word is always to work out our salvation with fear and trembling. If you can work out that foundational area, then everything will stem off or branch off from there. But if you're not coming from that foundation, that is where we'll have faulty judgment, faulty responses, and just, I'm satisfied in the cottage below, and then, all right.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think sometimes God still, you know, teaches some people that lesson. There are some people who've, you know, fallen from great heights, you know, and ended up, had great wealth and ended up with near nothing. And I think living in the times that we're living in, you know, people can often be tested, you know, and that's when they really need to look at their faith and to remain humble, because, you know, the Lord giveth and taketh away. And it's important to remember that we may have today, but it doesn't mean that we'll have tomorrow, you know?
Yeah.
But one of the things I was going to say is that with prosperity preaching, I wouldn't really have an issue with it if in those churches where those pastors are demonstrating, you know, living a life that's quite lavish, is that everybody in their church was also able to, you know, have a content level of financial, I wouldn't even call it freedom, just contentment, just be able to, you know, rather than the preacher in himself, you know, he has a large home, he has a fleet of cars, but there are people who can't provide shoes for their children. I think that's when there is a lack of balance, especially if they're still able to tithe and they're seeing that as a priority. You know, what is the preacher doing? Where's their responsibility for ensuring that their congregation are looked after?
I agree with you completely. That was always something in my mind. You have there, you're talking about going home to the big spread. How about making sure that the other families, they have something to eat, having an ear on the ground so that they can meet needs. And I'm not saying all, but you know, from what you're picking up and the complaints you're getting, it is not widespread. And it is something that is needed to be for all in the church environment to be mindful of. And you may not be able to have a big show, you know, and say, okay, I'm giving you a key for a new car or a basket or hamper, whatever it is, but sometimes the right hand will know, the left hand will know the right hand is doing. You just do it, you know, and I learned that from, you know, watching mom and dad in ministry and overseas and here. They will just do what they have to do for the members, make sure everybody, you know, is on par. So when we say blessings and, you know, depart in peace, you know, everybody's going home to a meal, you know, so and I like that point, making sure that there is balance. So if you have wealth demonstrated here, it should filter into the congregation.
How do you do it if you've got a congregation of 5,000 people?
But that's the thing.
Because that's their argument. That's the argument, isn't it? It's like, oh, well, I've got 5,000 members. I don't know what everybody's doing. Remember, it doesn't even cross their mind, to be honest, for some of them.
There's no
But it's
ways.
easy. Of course they are.
Yeah.
Of course, but it's easier to do it in a congregation of 100, 50, whatever.
That's a good
But if
point,
you've got 5,000, literally 5,000, I mean, Jesus fed them with 2 fish, but you know, but with 5,000 people, you know, that is a mammoth task. I mean, it can be done, but it's a mammoth task.
I'm thinking you have center, you have office where they can report, where they have lack or need and so forth.
And how to know who's genuine and who's not.
Exactly.
So,
Go through that. So you have to set up staff for that, but yeah, it's possible.
It's possible, but that's
And there's a lot of groups have clusters, right? Prayer clusters and groups.
Yeah.
You know, where, you know, if somebody notices that somebody has a need or, you know, and it needs to be reported back to the top. There are ways, I think.
But then there's also,
there is that want.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's the want. Do I want? If you want to, you'll find a way, won't you? But also, there's an element of pride within the church.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Also, private, so the people could be suffering, and you wouldn't necessarily know. Not talking about these big churches now. I'm talking more on a community level. But you know, there is that pride. Of not wanting to ask for assistance, not wanting to appear that you're, you know, you're poor or you're poor or whatever. So there is that as well. And how do you reach out to those to make sure that they're being covered?
I think it's, for me, from what I've observed, is more about the approach from the head. You know, because some people, when they're able to feed X, Y, and Z, some people call out. But if you have this understanding whereby, you know, your business is to yourself, we're just caring about you, the individual, not about proving, oh, we can do this as a church. No, we're caring about you. So when you come to us, you can just dial this number, send an email, whatever, and we will get to you and meet your needs. And that's that. But sometimes you know that you can be shamed, oh, we fed so many this and that. And it's how we handle it. You know, how we handle it. And the motive behind it. When you're helping someone, it is about meeting their needs, not making the establishment look like, oh, we're doing this, we're doing that, and competing between this church. We do more for the congregation, we do more for the community. No, it's about reaching the persons directly, you know.
So, okay. I think it summarized kind of like wealth and not being ashamed of having wealth, establish that, you know, we're stewards of our finances and that we should be using it to, you know, to honor our gifts that we've been given by God, and, you know, not being ashamed. As I said, I do think there's an element for some, there's a bit of shame about being wealthy or what have you. And then again, a bit of shame about, you know, not having wealth, kind of bashed on the head for both to some extent within Christendom. And, you know, Maria talked about obviously the importance of having certain insurances in place. And I think that's really crucial, I think, for here as well, because I don't think people have a good understand of how important insurance. When I've mentioned people, do you have insurance? Insurance for what?
Exactly.
Like, you see these big insurance companies, they've got lots of money, and what they want money for, they're not getting my money, and what you know, I'm not going to get anything out of it. I'm going to, you know, put down money for 20 years and I'm going to get a little pence back, and I could put that in the bank, and you know, and so on and so forth. And even trying to get persons to understand that banks are not the place to invest your money. That's just a place to hold your money because you've got no choice, right? That is not the place. So when they're complaining that the bank's only giving them 0.2%, well, you're lucky you're getting that, because they're not there for that. They're there just to hold your money and to make more money off your money. So just simple things like that, really, you know, in terms of, you know, the bank, or maybe the credit union might be a little bit better, because we have lots of credit unions here, Maria, which people, you know, utilize more, I think, to some extent. Particularly the maybe the lower working class will use more so than banks, and probably culturally as well. It's a cultural thing here to more have credit unions, you know, things around trust, and you know, these big conglomerate banks from overseas, and you know, what have you. So there is that cultural dynamic as well influencing financial decisions with regards to
a step up from
money.
Partner, which is great, because within our community, I think the first that we, you know, would go back, it was Partner, wasn't it?
Yeah. What do you call it here? We call it something else here.
Susu?
That's Susu. Susu?
Yeah. I know it's in Trinidad, or Meet and Turn.
Meet and Turn. They call it, Meet and Turn here in Barbados.
Yeah.
Partner is Jamaican, Susu in Trinidad. But yeah, community savings.
Yes, just got a nice one.
Yeah.
So yes, we still have a lot of those as well. But as you said, it's a step up by having access to credit unions and banks and so on. I think with technology and with the way the world is going, you've got no choice, because when you start work, you have to have a bank account in order to get your salary. So there's no more brown envelopes, you know, in your hand. So that's been a force with that. And obviously, one of the things we're seeing now with the change in technology is, I know it's still very new, you know, the cryptocurrency, talk about the digital currency that governments are talking about and stuff like that. So it's going to add even more jargon and more
trust and worry,
trust and worry, and you know, people already have limited trust in governments, and I find that here and you know, back home in the UK. So you know, how do you see that change affecting, you know, legacy, leaving, will, right, you know, all of that? How does that impact, do you think?
I think people are more sort of tuned into wanting to talk about finances and talk about what they're going to do. It's just a matter of what path they take in terms of, you know, when I meet people, or when I've done a talk, people say, oh, you know, I've been really thinking about doing something and I want to, but, you know, I haven't got around to it, or I didn't know where to go, and solicitors are so costly and I don't understand what they've said. So I think with people knowing now that, you know, there's digital currency, there's going to be even more to get their head around. They're thinking, I need to act now. And when I do talk to people, and when I do instruct things like wills, lasting power of attorneys for property and finance, we do have an area where we talk about digital currency and digital accounts, so that everything is considered, not only for now but for the future. So people are comforted that that is being considered, because it is, you know, it is another avenue, and a lot of clients have already begun investing. So yeah, I'd say the fact that money is taking another turn is making people think that they need to act now before it becomes, you know, what's going to happen to paper money, what's going to happen to money in the bank.
It must be hard for some of the elderly.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, without physical banks closing all the time in the UK. You know,
it was so hard to get. I remember, like with my grandparents, when pension was only paid through the bank, so you had to get an ATM card, and it was like, what is this? Like, I mean, this is going back a few years now, but you know, that whole shift of not being able to go to the post office, give in your book or whatever, and get your hard cash, and it's like, where's my hard cash? I have this card that I'm supposed to, you know, go and I've got to remember a number and what have you. You know, you can see that the plans obviously have been in play for a long time for
Mhm.
digital currency and what have you. But I just feel for the older members in the community, because me myself, I struggle with some of the jargon and, you know, what does this actually physically mean for the likes of us who are working still? You know, where does your money go? Does it not come into your bank account anymore? Does it go into this pot? And, you know, and what have you.
Yeah.
It's like, how does it actually work? So for somebody who's not even maybe computer literate or not in the work field employment, it's like, you know, this is just another layer,
Yeah.
another
Yeah,
set of
definitely.
challenges to deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, for me, that's where lasting power of attorney comes in to play, because I'm not sure if you have the same thing over in Barbados.
go
with
into it
lasting
actually. I was
power
going
of
to say
attorney.
nice segue, because that was where I was going into wills and
Ah.
attorney, so that'd be a good segue. So go ahead.
Yeah, so I always include that in my talks, because people seem to think lasting power of attorneys for people who are more mature, the elderly, because it's in place in case you lose mental capacity. But with the property and financial lasting power of attorney, it can be registered and utilised by the attorneys for the donor, so the individual who has it in place, when they still have mental capacity.
Right.
So for my more mature clients, it can be used as soon as it's registered, so that, you know, their children can do their banking for them, they can order shopping for them, they can help with authorization from the donor to make those financial decisions. So I'd say, you know, in an age where we're talking more about digital currency and online banking and things like that, the lasting power of attorney can be of a benefit. The key message there is that it's used with mental capacity, with authorization, and, you know, along with the donor, and not used by the attorney to make decisions on behalf of. You know, it should always
it's
be with
alongside.
consideration. Yeah. And
Yeah.
alongside.
So could you, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. Go
I
on.
was going to say, to take a step back then and say what power of attorney is in general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So power of attorney allows an individual to choose attorneys to advocate for them and make decisions for them if they were to lose mental capacity. And there's two. There's a property and financial, and there's a health and welfare. The property and financial lasting power of attorney is the only one that can be used while the donor still has mental capacity. So it doesn't have to be when they've lost mental capacity. So in that respect, it can be used to benefit if they've lost some physical capacity, let's say, or if they just want that level of support from their attorney. Attorneys can be anybody. They can be family members, as long as they're over 18, so older siblings, children, carers. They are chosen by the donor. The process in the UK takes around 20 weeks for registration. And, you know, a lasting power of attorney is important to have, because mental capacity can be lost not only from the likes of dementia or Alzheimer's. You know, somebody could suffer a head injury, or have a long-standing illness, and then their mental capacity could be at question. So it's something that I always say to people, you know, once they're in potentially a long-term relationship, as long as they're over 18, if they're thinking about doing things like estate planning, the lasting power of attorney sits in, you know, in that space. If I'll give you an example. So if somebody lost mental capacity or had a long-standing illness and wasn't able to make their own decisions, in the UK, their relative would have to apply for a deputyship from the Court of Protection, which would allow them to have the same powers as an attorney would have if they had a lasting power of attorney. And that is extremely costly, because they have to then undergo assessments before the deputyship order can be granted. Whereas a lasting power of attorney is put in place by the donor because they have mental capacity, and they're making their choices of sound mind to have attorneys act for them and be able to advocate for them. The health and well-being allows people to make decisions for them. You know, once they've lost mental capacity, it could be in the case of end-of-life care, or, you know, medical care, and, you know, if they have to have support in their home, or even consider things like nursing homes, you know, their attorneys would be people they trust or would advocate for them at that time.
Okay. And just for clarification, because we use the word attorney here like we use for lawyer.
Okay.
Just to clarify that, the attorney would be an identified person.
Mhm.
An identified person, yeah, they don't have to have
Yeah,
any
it doesn't have to be a
qualifications, they're
legal
not a
representative.
professional.
Yeah.
They're not a professional attorney, no. It could be myself appointing my adult children as my attorneys,
Mhm.
or family members over the age of 18 to advocate for my wishes. And
Yeah.
I always advise clients to have the conversation with their attorneys based on what they would like, what their plans are, so that when they are advocating for them, if, you know, God forbid they lose mental capacity, that it's their wishes.
Yeah.
You know, that are being put forward.
Yeah, yeah. And so those, because again, I think people just think about just to do a will. They don't know
Mhm.
about power of attorney, and obviously power of attorney is for when the person's alive, and then the will only
Yes.
affect when
100%. That's the clear difference. Yeah.
and that's the key difference. And I think people just think about wills. I don't think
Yeah.
most people think about power of attorney, and definitely lasting power of attorney, I didn't know about in terms of when
Yeah.
a person still got their capacity and you're working alongside them,
Yeah.
which is good to know. I didn't know
Yeah.
about that.
That's
one.
only for the property and financial, not for
Yeah,
the health and well-being.
not
Yeah.
for health and well-being. Yeah,
Okay. I was gonna
Yeah,
ask that,
yeah.
at what point would you advise that you'll get or, you know, acquire power of attorney? Yeah.
What
Yeah.
what point I would advise? I
At what
advise
point?
all
Yeah.
clients. So if a client contacts me for
Yeah.
consultation about a will, I will I will talk to them about insurance and lasting power of attorney, because it's a suite. It's a suite of making sure that that donor, that testator, as we call them, if they're making a will, is protected. So again, just as life insurance is for death, you know, and protects and looks after the beneficiaries, the will kind of does the same thing. It advocates their wishes on their death. But what about when they're alive? We've got to remember that you're a whole person and you're alive, and you have wishes, and you have, you know, your ideals about how you want to be treated. And that's why I try to make sure that the individual has an understanding of all three: insurance, lasting power of attorney, and the final stage, which is making a will and planning their estate. It's important that people have all three in place.
Wow.
Yeah. It sounds like a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It
but
does sound like a, but
how
it's
necessary?
well, this is it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what she's
And
saying.
it's something that the wealthy don't play with. I think it's
Yeah.
something that
They've got everything in
It's true.
trusts and
Yeah.
tied up, and anything
Yeah.
to away from the tax man, and making sure that this
Yeah.
wealth goes here and continues here, and they sow their seeds from very early.
Yeah.
In terms of what they want,
Yeah.
what they want to happen to their money. And rightly so. They've worked hard for it.
Yeah.
Whatever, you don't all just disappear when you
To the
close your
States.
eyes.
That's it.
Or go into the wrong hands, even though you always don't know which hands it's going into, but
Yeah.
people do change. But
That's it.
at least at the time, you can close your eyes knowing that things are in order, as you said, the house is in order, and persons can, leave comfortably.
Yeah.
I think. So going on to wills then, which is obviously the finale of these suites. What is a will? Why is it important? Why should we have one?
Good question. So a will is a legal document that's put in place when you're alive to execute your wishes upon death. So when you make a will, you become the testator, and you have what's called executors, who are chosen individuals that you are saying, you trust to advocate your wishes on your death. And that's to ensure that your beneficiaries receive their inheritance that you've decided to leave for them, and also to execute your funeral wishes that you stated within your will quite clearly. People can also have professional executors. They can choose to, if they don't have anybody that's nearest or dearest that they can appoint, or let's say trust. I'll be honest, there are some clients that don't have people that they trust and would rather appoint professional executors. The common theme has been adult children. So somebody would normally say, okay, so I have adult children, they need to be my executors. And I help people to have a think on that. And I, help them to understand that perhaps at the time of death, those adult children might be grieving. They, although they are your adult children, how do they handle their money? How is your relationship with them in terms of trust? And to really help, because people tend to fall on tradition. Well, it's my adult children that need to be my executors. Well, actually, no, it doesn't have to be. It can be a really close friend. It can be a sibling. Somebody ultimately that you trust is what I say to my clients, and that you trust that would be able to execute your wishes upon death without question. And I have had people go away and change their minds and appoint different executors, because, being honest, the people that they were going to go with were not, to them, the most trustworthy, but who they thought that they had to have. So I normally give my testators 5 good reasons why they need a will. And the first reason really is that you get to plan. You get to plan what happens with the wealth that you've created within your life, rather than the laws of intestacy, which we have in the UK, to make that decision for you. And that is simply, if you die without a will, which is intestate, then it then gets decided for you who would have your wealth. And that could be
Same here.
mother, father, sibling. It could be people that you don't have a relationship with, simply because you haven't bothered to take the time to make a will. So the most important is you get to plan, you get that level of choice, and choice is the second one, because you get to choose who can act as your executors or trustees, rather than that being appointed on your behalf. Again, it may not be someone that in life you would have wanted. You get the third reason I give people is that you get to appoint. And I know we've talked about appointing trustees and executors, but appoint guardians. Now, a lot of people don't realise that if you have children under the age of 18, particularly in the UK, if you are the main parent or guardian and you pass away, there is that possibility that your children or child could be taken into care upon death, while assessments are carried out to your closest family members, and decisions made for them to become their legal guardians. So, if you already know you have children, minor children, you can appoint your guardians in the will, and upon death, those children go to those guardians without question, because you've made that choice, you've had that choice, and that's often where people are quite surprised. They didn't realise that could potentially happen.
Because again, community-wise, whether here or in the UK, we have an informal fostering system within the community, where people live with their grandma, auntie, uncle. It's just, well, if I'm not here, then you'll go to auntie so-and-so or uncle so-and-so. And so they just assume that that's what will happen. The nearest person that they normally live with, it will go. But that's not necessarily the case.
Not necessarily the case at all. And that's another thing that I like to educate people on, especially younger people who have children and haven't thought about anything for the future. The next reason number 4, is efficiency. In the UK, we have inheritance tax and laws that where up to 40% of the inheritance needs to be tax paid upon that. So without a will, you haven't thought about making your estate efficient and putting things in place to avoid, or even to not so much avoid, because we're not talking about tax evasion, we're talking about making the estate efficient, and making sure that the legacy and the inheritance goes to the right people at the right time. And if you haven't had those discussions, you can't make those plans, and it isn't necessarily an efficient estate. So, for instance, in the UK, there's 61% of people who don't have a will. 39% who do have a will don't have a will that's efficient for their estate. They have a basic will that may not leave to their ultimate beneficiaries. So I often offer a service where I will review an individual's will for a small fee, and if it's efficient based on their objectives that they tell me, then that's fine. I'll explain to them the reasons why it meets the need, and if it isn't, I'll give them the reasons why it could be more efficient, and then they have the choice whether or not to take out additional services. And I think finally, the final reason is peace of mind. It's the third and last area of making sure that your wealth and your finances are taken care of, your house is in order, you've had your input into where your legacy that you've worked for would go to, whether it be your children, your grandchildren. You've actually had a say, so you can have peace of mind. And it's a fact that families who take the time to discuss end of life planning, end of life wealth, you know, and funeral wishes leave less stress and less conflict. You know, it's often families who haven't discussed, and then on death, you know, families are finding out that this person hasn't necessarily been written in and so on, and people haven't been able to state their reasons, that there is huge conflict, and then ultimately you know, that wealth can diminish, can be reduced because of, you know, getting legal professionals involved. So I often explain to my clients, especially if they've taken out a will with me, done lasting power of attorney, at the time when I'm present to support them with having their documents signed. That's also a round table where, you know, I'm blessed to see families have conversations. The testator shares what's in their will with their executors, and you know, I leave there knowing that those conversations, even if it's just the once, they've been had. You know?
So at what stage or what time one should go about thinking about a will? Should we wait until you gain
Think about
mass?
or do a will?
Think about and do.
Oh, good.
I'm thinking more of the action
It's
part.
the do.
It's doing.
Okay.
You think about it all the time.
Yeah, nothing
Yeah.
happens,
And that's
but
what Maria was saying. That people think about things all the
They
time.
think about it all the time. Yeah, it's just
yeah.
So it's like, when
What-
should we do
do
a
it.
will? Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
okay. So it can be as basic as when somebody has a life insurance policy. A life insurance policy is an asset. Now, I always ensure that my clients put their life insurance policy in trust, because it's something that's held outside of the estate for inheritance tax purposes, and that needs to be done at the time of executing that policy. But it's still an asset that would need to be referenced in a will. So for me, it's at that point. It's also the point when you have children, because you need to consider your guardians and who would look after your child as well as you, based on your wishes, should you die, because you know, we don't know when death is coming for us. Definitely when you become a homeowner, because you know, again, you've got assets, you need to, or it could be just somebody who is quite driven to have their say, to have their wishes. They may not be a homeowner, but they have possessions, or they have a mind to know how they want their body to be treated, whether it comes to, you know, their funeral wishes or so on. A basic will isn't hugely costly, so it is something that, you know, if nothing, it leaves your final wishes.
Okay.
So,
So as long, so the answer to the question is, once you're over 18, really, you need to start. Or it could be that you've inherited.
once you've got an asset of some sort.
You've received some form of inheritance. Definitely at that point, you need to
Yeah.
think about leaving your own will,
Yeah.
to protect that legacy that you've been left.
Definitely. So what's some of the, I mean, because some people say, oh, I don't need a will. And you know, obviously given good reasons as to why you should need a will. How do you convince your people to actually do a will? Because our community, you know, are still very reluctant about talking about death, much less to sit down and have a whole round table discussion with, you know, with children and whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. So with the profession and what I do, I don't so much convince people. I go around and give people information.
Okay.
And I'm often contacted after they've had the information, sometimes weeks later, and they've told me that what I said resonated with them. They've been needing to get around to it, and you know, and they've decided to come through me because they can relate to me. I think it's knowledge. Knowledge is the key, because people ultimately don't know what they don't know. You know, just like people with children don't know about the fact that they need guardians.
Yes.
You know, so yeah, I think it's ultimately just giving people that knowledge. It's talking about it, making it normal, normalizing conversations about death and about finances. You know, recently people have been talking about Aretha Franklin.
Yeah.
The case of Aretha Franklin, because it's been in the news about her handwritten will.
Yeah.
So I've had somebody contact me recently and say to me that they had handwritten their wishes for years, but now they want to make it more official. And that's basically based on Aretha Franklin. So again, it's about knowledge. They got that information through the news. So I think people need to be well informed. and I think that's maybe the position that church could take, you know, having somebody like me speaking at church,
Correct.
you know, people will go away and it will resonate. But it's,
Yeah.
I think there isn't convincing people if they don't want to do it, but if you give them the knowledge, knowledge is power.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Because that was going to be my next question. Actually, you touched on it with regards to Aretha Franklin. It's like, so how do you do will? Can you just write on a piece of paper and seal it and put it in the back of your wardrobe and hope somebody will find it? Or, you know, what is the process to do a will? Or what process should people follow to do a will?
I mean, I always say to people, my clients, whether you come through me or you go through some other avenue, just do it. So yeah, you can administer your own will. There are will making kits that you can buy online, you can buy in stationery shops that can guide an individual through how to make a will. So that is one way. You can go, the common theme is that people believe that they need to use a solicitor to make a will. That's not the case in the UK, because the will writing industry is a non-regulated industry. You don't have to use a solicitor, and that can be quite costly. You can use an estate consultant like myself, who is a real will writer, affiliated with a society called the Society of Will Writers here in the UK, you know, and who ensure that will writing is quality is to a very high esteem. So it really is, you know, I've had clients who I've gone to their home to take their instructions, and they've given me their handwritten will, and that's made my job quite easy. But they've chosen to use somebody like me to make it more official.
For sure.
So yeah, there are lots of ways in that respect, and it's really down to personal choice. And one of the things that I tend to do and educate people on is the reason why they should use a storage service as well. Have your will stored rather than, even if it is a handwritten will, you can pay to have your will stored, so that will on your death is your last will and testament that is being used. And that was the question for Aretha Franklin. It wasn't whether or not the will was legal, because I believe that she'd written it and it was seen as being legal because, you know, it had 2 signatures and what have you. But it's whether or not it was the very last will and testament.
If there's
because
something
every
else.
new will overwrites your original one.
Yeah.
So I always advise my clients to take out a storage service that avoids their will being lost, defaced, tampered, damaged in fire or floods. And I often get clients who say to me, you know, I made a will years ago and I can't remember where it is.
Yeah.
So
that saves that problem.
Yeah, definitely.
So wills are
Not really.
thinking.
I was thinking, because I was thinking along the lines of, let's say, a single mom, and she would have decided, you know, while going on, she acquired different things, and she's thinking about doing a will. What happens now when this woman, let's say she goes on, let's say she's getting married and so forth, how should she look at this will? How should she handle that process, that transition?
That's a good point, because so a single mum, she makes a will. In that time period, she's protected. I take it she's listed her guardians for that child. And then as she's gone on in later life, she's met somebody and she wants to get married. Okay, marriage revokes a will. So the will that she made when she was a single person is now null and void as soon as she marries. So she would need to make another will, you know, preferably with her partner. She can still make a single will as a married person, but there are laws in the UK once you become a married individual in terms of what, you know, how the laws of intestacy work and what's split on death. So marriage revokes a will. So a single person who has a will needs to make a new will as soon as they get married.
That's interesting. I don't think people don't realize this. They just think,
I will hands up, and before I became a will writer, I wasn't aware of that either. So yeah,
because
a lot of people don't realize that.
No, sometimes I heard the word revoke. It's like,
I was
trying to keep it down.
Whereas people think that divorce revokes a will. Divorce doesn't revoke a will. What happens when you become divorced is that the divorced party is treated as though they passed away. So they don't necessarily inherit, But people assume, oh, I'm divorced, I need to make a new will. It's more when you get married that you need to actually make a new will.
So just for clarification though, so if you're married and you made a will,
Yeah.
single or
single
jointly,
person.
right?
Sorry, if you're married and you make a will at that point,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you divorce,
yeah,
that will is still active. Is that what you're saying?
it treats the other party as though they've deceased, although they haven't.
And they
It
haven't.
just treats them as though they're no longer in your life.
Oh,
They're no
okay.
longer, yeah.
So say you've got a couple who are married and then they divorce
Yeah.
and they made a joint will.
Yeah.
But they're now divorced.
That's it.
So say
So
for
yeah, they
example,
wouldn't. So the other party still wouldn't necessarily inherit
inherit.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
unless there are joint assets. That's very different.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Joint assets.
That's
make
what
it
I was going to
very
get at.
different.
So
Yeah,
more about
yeah,
joint assets or
Yeah.
a joint will.
yeah.
Yeah.
Joint
Ah,
assets make it very different.
Yeah.
And I,
If they have a
I,
joint will,
yeah,
what happens then?
it's treated as though the other party is deceased. So
This is okay.
yeah,
Right.
so their portion of that will is still live. if you
Right,
say.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. And obviously, if one of the two parties remarry,
That's
what
very
happens to
different.
that joint will again? That
That's
joint
very
will now-
different. So let's say, for instance, you have a married couple who have a joint will,
Mhm.
or a basic will, let's say, where
Mhm.
on death they leave 100% of their inheritance to the other party,
Yeah.
and they divorced, and the other party has got married. Let's say it's more detrimental if there's children involved.
Mm.
Because if there's children involved, there's this thing called sideways disinheritance.
Mhm.
So if you divorce and you then remarry, and in your original will you had your portion go into your children on death, or then that will then go to your new spouse,
New spouse.
your new partner. So it's very important. I mean, I always say to my clients, it's really important to
Mhm.
have your will in your mind at least every sort of 5 to 7 years,
Yeah, that's what they recommend.
or as circumstances change within your life. So I mean, people don't have to think about making a new will once they move home or anything like that, but
Yeah.
definitely
The status, individual
separation,
status
divorce,
Mm.
yes, because inheritance is attackable once people remarry.
Mm.
So I often say to my clients, if they have an inheritance and they've left inheritance to 2 children, well, it's quite substantial as it can be. It's at that point really where I need to be speaking to those children individually, because if they have partners and they're not married, what they're going to inherit from the original testator is then attackable on marriage. So it kind of filters down.
Right. So just for clarification again, then, so if two children are left a substantial just inheritance in general, they then
Wow.
get married,
Mhm.
that inheritance could, and then they, unfortunately, God forbid, something happens to them, that
Yeah.
inheritance will then go to their new spouse.
Yeah.
It would then be out of the family, could well be out of the
Potentially,
family,
yeah.
out of the family line.
Yeah.
There's
I mean, it's such a wide topic. I often do my talks and say I need another week because
Mhm.
there's just so many different avenues, so many different scenarios, and that's why a will can't be one size fits all,
Yeah. No.
because families are so complex. And the first question I say to my clients is, tell me what your objectives are. Tell me what your personal objectives are so that I can then tailor your estate planning and your will to you and your circumstance. And I suppose that's when we talked about how they can go about making a will, that's the only issue then really. If they do use a stationary outlet and make their own will, is it a one size fits all will, and is it really going to take what they need to take into account in effect?
Right. Okay. That's good. That's good to.
That's
So there's a lot
really
of little things that little tentacles that interlink.
Yeah, and let's face it, our communities, our families can often be very complex. Children from previous relationships, children outside of marriages. Our families within the community are not very straightforward sometimes. So I always urge my clients to be very honest with me, because there isn't any judgment, but if they're not honest with me, I can't make their plans efficient.
Right.
Right,
So it's
okay.
about being honest because of
Yeah,
the reality of it all.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, and again, it's about that knowledge and people understanding the legalities and because you're not going to be here. The whole point of the will is that you're not actually
Okay.
going to be here to say, no, that's not right. That's not what
yeah,
I mean.
absolutely.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
so it has to be very plain, has to be very clear, very specific,
Yeah,
and in line with the laws. Because as you said,
Yeah.
there's little tricky bits that if it's not done properly, you know, it could be null and void and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
So it's
definitely.
important
Open to be
know.
contested.
Mhm.
Yeah. And speaking of contested, because there are people we know in our community that do contest the wills, you know,
Yeah,
Mhm.
a niece or a daughter or son or somebody who's not happy with the
yeah.
way it was written and stuff. So what's the kind of the laws or legalities around being able to contest the will? How can you try and make your will as you know,
Yeah.
contestable proof as possible?
Mhm.
Another good question. Anybody is open to contest a will. So when I advise my clients, I often try to help them to make it so that you know, that isn't the case, or that if there is somebody who contests, that they have done everything to prove that decisions have been made while they have been of sound mind, that they aren't coerced. So we have something called a letter of wishes. You know, and I often have clients who want to exclude certain people from their will. And there are laws on, you can exclude anybody, but there are certain laws that can make things a little bit difficult. If you exclude, let's say, your husband, the likelihood is if you exclude your husband without good reason, especially if you're both financially dependent on each other, that is going to be contested and a judge would rule in favour of the spouse that's still alive. So I would often advise my clients to state their reasons in a letter of wishes, have that witness to, you know, and I would be a witness to state that they made that decision of sound mind, to write that letter in their own handwriting, given as much reason as possible for why they've decided to exclude, and it's often emotional reasons. I then would advise my client to leave a monetary gift in their will for that individual, whether it's a husband or whoever it is that they want to exclude, and that often can limit the reason for contesting. You know, I don't want you to inherit this amount of my estate, but I'm going to leave you a gift. And that often will then be seen as favourable in the eyes of the court, that a gift has been left and there has been good reasons to why that individual didn't want to leave anything. But to answer the question, anybody can contest. It really is depending on how watertight the will is and has been written as to whether or not a judge would rule in the favour of the persons that are contesting. The biggest thing is to have the will written up legally. I would say definitely to avoid that happening.
Yeah. Right. So the legality part
Yeah.
is crucial. So as much as you can handwrite a will and get it signed
Yeah.
you, in order to kind of make it bulletproof or contesting proof, one way is obviously to have a legally binding official document.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. Anything else you've got?
I'm cool.
Nicole,
Yeah.
I think that's been really useful.
Very important.
I think even though you're in the UK, I think a lot of what you've said is relevant here in the Caribbean. There's nothing that you said that we don't have here.
Good, yeah.
I think it's a global thing.
Yeah.
In terms
It
of
is.
the general information of just getting a will wherever you are, and obviously, you know, if you do have different rules and regulations, then obviously, you know, you will get that sorted. But I think it's crucial to you know, the information you've given around, you know, insurance policies, the importance of insurance, necessity for insurance, power of attorney, lasting power of attorney, will, are all things that our community need desperately, because there's a lot of wealth within our community, a lot of assets and things, and they could just be sitting there and end up, you know, even here in the Caribbean, you can drive around and you see a lot of houses that are dilapidating, you know, no one's looking after them because they've either been left to somebody, or it's in contest, you know, it's,
Yeah.
there's a caveat
Yeah.
and no one can't do anything, or, you know, there's a lot of expats and so on, so people might have left their house to children in the UK,
Yeah.
America, and the house is just sitting there. So there's, you know, again, it's
Yeah.
all efficiency
Yeah,
of
definitely.
assets, and, you know, and the wealth that we've been given and been blessed with, and making sure that, as you, I like the word efficiency, you know, making sure that what you've worked hard for, what you've been given, what you've been blessed with, is
Yeah.
efficient. And you know my thing is about building generational wealth. I think, you know,
Definitely.
that is crucial, so that when, you know, our young people, the next generation, are not starting from scratch every single time.
Absolutely.
Because that is why
Yeah.
it's so difficult for us, because we're having to start all the time from scratch. You know, there's
Definitely.
no
Yeah.
trust fund, there's no inheritance, there's no assets, there's just nothing. You know,
Yeah,
just
there's debt,
out.
unfortunately.
It's just, and it's debt.
and
If
there's
anything,
debt.
it's just
Yeah.
debt and there's debt.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
anything, there's no actual legacy, no springboard.
Yeah,
For
we need to
our
change the
young
narrative
people.
on that.
And that's what we need
Definitely.
to, that balance needs a shift. That balance needs to be addressed, sorry, or the imbalance needs to be addressed and brought to the fore. And I think it's really crucial that people have access to your information. And it's great that someone from the community is actually doing it, because when you do go to get advice, normally it's not someone who understands our culture, doesn't understand the jargon, the terminology, the
Yeah.
intricacies of our culture. And so I think that's important as well. And I think that's where you get your review, you know, your positive review
Yeah, definitely.
from, that they have that connection.
My clients often become very good friends because
Yeah.
you know, it's very intimate. It's very personal and emotional when they're talking to me about their plans for their death. So yeah, I've you know, been very, very fortunate, very blessed to meet some lovely people, some great people who I now class as friends.
That's good.
You know, who've trusted me to take on board their most important decisions.
It is, and it's important. And I think this is you, Maria. This is your ministry, definitely, you know, allowing the community, giving the community that information, that knowledge. And you know, I think it's great that we're able to put that information out there as well, because people need to know. You know,
Yeah,
people,
definitely.
Important as you were speaking to, where you give a balanced approach. In other words, you're embracing spiritual principle along with practical principles. And that is very critical, because, you know, God cares about every aspect of our lives. And what you're saying now is that we as individuals, we have to do our homework. We have to be responsible for and good stewards of what God has given us. Be savvy at it.
yeah.
In other words, if you want to make something good, you have to put more plan and intention into it. And God definitely wants us to manage our money, manage our resources, manage our time, everything. And as we do that, think about the next generation and the next generation. Can't be, as you said, when people come to you, you get to find out their hearts. Their intention. You can't be thinking about ourselves alone in the present, but you have to be thinking of our children's children and work towards that.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I've got a little quote here that I was thinking. It said, "We will either worship wealth or worship with our wealth."
That's
Say
that's
that
a
again.
really
Say
excellent
That's
point.
my guess.
Yeah.
So we will either worship wealth, and I think that encapsulates all the things that we've discussed this evening and this afternoon. So we will either worship wealth or worship with our wealth.
I like that one.
I like that one. I'm going. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
you
good.
know?
can grab it.
Yeah.
You can grab it. Yes.
Wow.
We'll either worship wealth
You
or
just
worship.
pull that bomb right
with
there.
Yeah.
Slip that one in again.
Because I was thinking about that correlation of, you know, our hearts, Christendom, wealth, you know, the whole kind of secular environment that we're also having to deal with. And there's nothing wrong with having wealth. We've established that. We've established that scripturally. There's nothing wrong with having wealth, but it's what you do with that wealth. As I said, keep saying about being stewards of our finance, being stewards of the blessings that God has given us. And so there's nothing wrong with having that wealth. It's just to make sure that you've acquired it without any blood or any, you know, harmful intention, and using that then to glorify God.
Amen.
And giving the gratitude to God
Yes,
Always.
exactly. That glorified. Yes,
Correct.
always. Always. You can
Correct.
take the praise, you know.
Yeah.
You as an individual can take the praise
Yeah.
because you're the vessel,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You're executing that.
Mhm.
So you can take the praise, but we all say, yes, thank you. But
Glory
it's
and
because
honor.
of glory and honor to,
Yeah.
you know,
It's
to
because
God.
of him.
Because of him.
Yeah.
And that's where we have to, because I think again, people think you can't take praise.
You can't say that.
But you
Yeah.
can. You can
Mhm.
have praise, you can have
Yeah.
wealth, all these things. They're given unto us.
Mhm.
But it's how we, you know, how we become stewards of these. So it's
Yeah.
about using whatever we have to use that for worship and to glorify God.
Yeah.
But I just want to thank you, Maria, on behalf of Ministry of Divine Women. Thank you.
Thank
for
you.
coming.
It's been an honour. Thank you very much.
It is in now
Appreciate it.
minutes to 9, maybe minutes to 8, something like that for you on a Saturday evening.
22.
22, okay, still got the evening left. So but just to thank you for giving us that wealth of information.
Yeah.
I think it's useful for anybody who's watching, you know, will benefit
Yeah.
from your definite ministry of providing financial consultancy, will writing, power of attorney, estate
Yeah.
planning, all the lovely things that you do
Thank you.
for our community and beyond. So may God continue to bless you
Mhm.
and to keep you as you go forward with your ministry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All
Thank you so much for
Thank
having me. As I
you.
said, it's been an honour.
Absolutely.
You know, it is my passion, and as Pauline says, it is my ministry. Definitely realise that now. You know, and yeah, that's what I'm pushing forward for. You know, I think that will be the legacy that I leave. You know,
Yeah,
that I've been
yeah.
able to support the community in that knowledge to help them to understand a little bit more about financial literacy and leaving a legacy and generational wealth. Definitely.
Wonderful.
Definitely. That's what walking in your purpose
Yes.
looks
Yeah,
and
yeah.
sounds like.
Looks
Yeah.
like it. You get all fired up and ready
Yeah,
to
you
go.
get passionate about it. So fantastic. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Yeah.
Take
All
care.
right, Andrew, take care.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Bye bye.